Evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us. I will keep the introduction short and sweet. I'm sure you want to hear far more from the gentlemen who put together our broadband plan and have far more in-depth knowledge on the project than I do at this point. But I do want to say I'm very excited to have them here. This has been a couple years in the making for the city of Superior. So we're excited to have them joining us and filling the citizens in on what an open access fiber optic network could do for the citizens of Superior. I think if this pandemic has taught us anything, it's how essential broadband and good internet is in the 21st century. So this is a very timely topic. We are still in the exploratory stages of this. So now is the time to hear more from the citizens. And the best way for you to give your informed opinion is to get more education and knowledge on what we're looking to do here with this project. It has been briefly introduced to City Council, and now we're here going to be doing a handful of listening sessions with you, so you have an opportunity to give feedback, ask questions, and become better prepared and equipped to know what this project is. So with that, I'll hand it over to Jeff to go a little bit more in depth.
Hey. Thank you. You unmuted. Thank you, Nick and Devin, and thank you to everybody that is listening and going to participate tonight. This has been a 2-year process to work through a decision-making framework and to think about the needs of the residents of Superior. And we're really at a stage where it starts to get interesting and starts to get fun in terms of making decisions and planning to execute. The process is helped by the fact that through the pandemic, as Nick said, we've become aware of how important the infrastructure is. Previously, many people were not aware how important things like upload were. And as we've all used technologies like the one we're using tonight, the upload speed becomes more obvious. So the federal government's certainly aware, and there are a lot of opportunities in terms of help in terms of moving this forward. So, we're all familiar with core utility systems, and something that's been debated and become increasingly relevant in terms of thinking about this as utility infrastructure as broadband, and specifically fiber optic broadband connectivity. From a policy point of view, I would say we're not quite there, meaning people are not quite ready to treat this infrastructure the way we treat water, sewer, and electricity infrastructure. But there's certainly been a change of tide, particularly over the last year, in terms of realizing that this is in fact essential infrastructure. And in an economy that's a communication economy, people are much more focused on, we've got to have reliable and fast connectivity to our homes and our businesses. And we're missing out on opportunities from an economic development point of view if we're not prepared to treat the infrastructure as essential. So some are calling it the fourth utility. And I think as a country, we're certainly moving closer to treating it that way from a policy point of view. So an important part of the discussion and the work we did with the CIT committee in Superior was to look at the different technologies, to look at what's available today in Superior, and to help everybody understand, both at the city council level and with the CIT committee, the impact of these different media and the constraints that come with them. DSL is what the telephone companies had as the internet emerged, and they were successfully able to run the internet across this DSL infrastructure and quickly became a significant player in the internet access market because of that infrastructure. Satellites have been available for quite a few years. Of interest to a lot of people is Elon Musk's project with Starlink, which is a low orbit satellite system and really is just starting to come online now. There are people connected. In comparison to DSL, it is faster than DSL. It has capacity up to about 150 megabits. I think the people I've talked to that actually have it are seeing right around 100 megabits per second on download. Cable has quite a bit more capacity than either DSL or this low orbit satellite technology. Cable, there are a few variables that affect reliability and speed. Part of it is distance. So the cable signals will start to deteriorate over a number of feet. And so if you're at the end of a line, you may have a different experience than somebody that's at the beginning of a line. Cable's got the ability to do 940 megabits on the download. The nature of cable is that it doesn't have the same, the upload is vastly different than the upload or the download speed. So a maximum that people could see on cable today is around 1 gig or 940 megabits. They keep pushing to extend the download capacity, but I think this is a fair representation of what's possible today. And then there's obviously a lot of talk about 5G, and there has been for the last 3 or 4 years. 5G is advertising speeds at 2 gigabits. It's not available in much of the country, and there's not enough data to really say what that performance looks like, but at least from an advertised point of view, they're talking about 2 gigabits or 2,000 megabits per second. So as you look at this, it's clear that cable companies are winning the day in comparison to DSL. And it really is because the speeds and the capacity are much better. When you compare all of these things to fiber optics, though, all of them pale in comparison. So this is not an exaggerated graphic. And in fact, it's probably an understated graphic in terms of what fiber optics can do relative to these other technologies. So we're quite comfortable saying that fiber optics is 50-year infrastructure. And the reason is, when we say it can do 25 terabits a second or 25 million megabits per second, they've demonstrated 150 million megabits per second over 1,000 kilometers. So we don't think we're at the end of what fiber can do. They're making it better and better over time. But it's hard to imagine a day where the country's struggling to get above an average of 100 megabits per second. Hard to imagine a day where we're going to need 25 million megabits per second. So our belief is that all infrastructure projects for broadband should be built around fiber optics. All right, another consideration as we think about network architecture is whether we're going to have a shared infrastructure or a dedicated infrastructure. And by shared, what that means is that most of the country today is running, and I'm going to say that 99% of the country is running on what we call a shared infrastructure. And if it's fiber, that would mean that it's on a passive optical network. Cable networks are shared by design, as are DSL. And so that means that the signal is coming to a point and then it's split out, often to 32 homes, sometimes 64 homes. But if your carrier is telling you that your speeds are up to some amount, the reason they're telling you up to is they can't really guarantee any kind of performance because they're using the splitter technology and you're sharing it with your neighbors. And so what your neighbors are doing on the network will have a real impact on both your reliability and your speed. And so it's a significant issue. So as we think about architecture, a question is, are we going to have a shared architecture or are we going to have something that's dedicated where everybody has their own fiber connection? This is what the shared infrastructure looks like. And then when we talk about a dedicated architecture, what that means is that everybody's coming into a core switch, and then out from that switch, there is a single fiber line per home. And so you're on a dedicated system coming into a switch. And the reality is that switched networks handle congestion much better than a bus architecture or a shared architecture. All right, and then I already referenced this. The asymmetrical nature of many networks has become a problem, particularly in the last year. Many of the activities that you would do at the office, like a Zoom meeting, when you're uploading information to the internet, if you're going out to share a large file, you're going to use the upload. This was not an obvious thing to many people pre-COVID, but now many people are aware that the headroom or the limits for these asymmetrical networks is a problem. And so one of the recommendations we made to the CIT committee and to City Council was that if Superior goes forward with this project, that you look at building a symmetrical network where the standard is 1,000 megabits per second, and that it's the same download speed and upload speed. Nick referenced this idea of an open access network in his comments. And so I just want to briefly explain what is meant by an open access network. Today's networks are built so that, the analogy we've used for years now, be equivalent to FedEx having their own highway and not letting UPS drive on that highway or anybody else. It's their own dedicated highway. And then building a separate highway for UPS and its traffic. That's obviously not the way we build our road systems. And open access is really built around the same idea that we have for our road systems, where you've got one highway and then you allow all traffic to go across that highway. It's that simple. It's a robust road, digital road, and it's open to, in this case, any ISP that will follow the rules. So one way to talk about this is shared infrastructure. So rather than building, fiber networks are not cheap to build. Rather than building multiple instances of a road, our recommendation is to build one robust road and then make that available to everybody, all the traffic running across that road. To achieve an open access network, one thing that's important is that we create this separation between the services on the network and the infrastructure. So the infrastructure would be, the DSL, the cable, the fiber optics. Going forward, we believe all infrastructure should be fiber optics. So we create this separation, and this is both a philosophical idea, but we also instantiate it in the technology. And the reason we create this separation is so that whoever's in charge of operating the infrastructure can do their business. And then we're going to open up that infrastructure to allow a variety of service providers to come onto the network in a seamless way and deliver their service across that network and not be bumping into each other. So not getting in the way of each other. So the separation between these things allows that to happen. I'm going to play this little video, which is one illustration of how open access can work. So when you bring a certain level of automation to an open access network, then choosing your ISP will work a lot the same way that shopping on Amazon or Walmart.com or Target online, however you want to shop online, selecting your ISP can be much the same. So you would come into the interface, you would look at your ISP options, find the price and the value that you're looking for, work through the legal agreements. And then when you hit subscribe, the automation in the network will connect you to an ISP. So you don't need somebody to come to your house. You don't need to schedule an appointment. If you want to unsubscribe, it's just the reverse process. You hit the unsubscribe button, that network connection is broken, and then you can go back out and choose another internet service provider. So it really is less than a minute to work through this to select an ISP. And we can do this because we've got a system where there's electronics in the home connected to a central office, or a data center is a way to think about it. And the software automation allows this to happen.
So one thing, Jeff, I'll point out here is earlier this week, one of the major network operators in Superior went down, and nobody that was connected through that network had any connectivity to the internet. My understanding is for about a day and a half. In this model, all you would do is simply go and select and subscribe to a different service provider. And it would take you about a minute, and you would be back up and running. So I just wanted to make that relevant point to the experience that folks in Superior had this week.
Good. All right, so part of the work we did with the committee was to try and get an understanding of what the marketplace looks like in Superior today. We did that by looking at advertised rates. So we simply went on to the websites of the various companies that are serving your community today. We looked at what their advertised rates are. And then, as many of you know, we also conducted a survey over a number of months where we were asking people to tell us what they're paying and to look at their invoices and give us accurate data. We actually collected invoices to validate the data. And so what I'm going to go through for a couple of screens here is the data that came out, both of what we looked at online and the feedback we got through the survey process and then looking at invoices. For the cable company, Spectrum, serving Superior, we've got their standard pricing. There's an install fee that's listed. And then what we looked at from the billings, from the invoices, we looked at an average price for a 50 by 5 connection. So 50 download, 5 upload of $61.01. And then for triple play, voice, internet, and cable TV, average billings of $208.89. Price goes up for 100 by 10 connection to $86.53 and $247. And then we weren't, in the data we collected, we didn't show any data points for a 400 meg connection or a 940 megabit connection. For CenturyLink, again, this is going to be across DSL technology. Average internet billings for a 1.5 megabit connection of $46.24, 10 megabit connection of $75. Interestingly, the 15 megabits is less expensive at $59.55, and then a 60 megabit connection for $74. On the business side, you're going to consistently see businesses paying more than residential customers, often not getting really a different connection than a residential customer, but paying more because they're in the business category. So here for 100 by 10, the internet alone, 119. For a 200 by 10, 145 with Spectrum. And then for CenturyLink Business, for a 100 meg connection, standard pricing at 64. The billings we looked at were 147. And then there is a CenturyLink fiber option for fiber optic option for some businesses, a 500 megabit connection. The 55,000 there is that there's a cost to get that installed, and that gets passed on to the consumer, and then spread out over a number of years. When we look at this on a cost per megabit basis, what you can see with Spectrum, I won't go through all these numbers, but you can see we've got a range for Spectrum of 15 cents to $1.22 on a cost per megabit. As you get a faster speed, the cost per megabit goes down. On the business side for Spectrum, a range from 43 cents up to $1.19. On CenturyLink, a range from $1.24 to $30.83. And CenturyLink Business from $2.04 to $3.45. We're projecting, if Superior goes forward with this project, that the cost per megabit, there's two categories here. One, if the consumers finance the infrastructure, so there's a cost to build the network, that's the capital cost. So when the consumer decides to have that financed, which will be an option, it turns out to be just over 5 cents with the infrastructure. If the consumer decides to pay off the infrastructure up front, then the cost is down at 3 cents per megabit. We also, I referenced that we conducted a survey. This is an overview of the survey data. We provided this to the CIT committee. We had 538 responses to the survey. Just in summary, those that said they would support the network, yes, and possibly. Possibly means I need more data. So 73% said yes, possibly just over 22%. For those who said the internet speed is important, very important, 83%, somewhat important, 15%, and not important, less than 1%. Average connection speed, so what are you seeing? We asked people to go out and measure their speeds. The average that we were seeing is 76 megabits per second, and the upload speed just over 10 megabits per second. On the question of how important is choice, 5% said not important, 23% said somewhat important, and 72% very important. And then lastly, rating of current ISPs, 16% said poor, 35% said fair, 31% said good, they're almost 32%, 13% very good, and 4%, just over 4%, excellent. This, the broadband plan in total is available. I think it's linked out on the website, so anybody that wants to see the full plan can go there and look at it. An important thing that we've been talking to the committee about is having a clear understanding of what people are paying today on the aggregate as a community. So if we assume that there's 13,000 premises, whether homes or businesses, in the Superior city limits, we taking the average monthly internet cost from the survey data. It was from our invoice and other analysis we did in the survey process. Average monthly cost of $81.54. That times 13,000 will give you an annual internet spend of just over 12 million, just under 13 million. And then if you spread that out over 20 years, $250 million. So this is important because it helps to frame a couple of things, one of which is the amount of money that the community is spending on this essential service today. The other that we'll get to shortly is much of this money is leaving the community, not all of it, but much of it is leaving the community today, going to the companies that are servicing the city. I referenced earlier that with some of the COVID funding coming out of federal government, there is an opportunity to support this project with federal grant money. All right, so one of the goals of the project was to see what we can do to drive down the average cost to make this connectivity more affordable. If the data we collected is accurate and the average cost is $86.53 today for the cable provider, our target is to get the price down in the $50 range. We won't know that until we go out for RFP for engineering and construction. But I think it's safe to say that we're going to be within 10% of that. I think it's safe to say that we'll be within 10%, and that could be lower or higher. But I think that's a comfortable target for us. And then in terms of speeds, we believe it's possible to take the average connection speed from 100 by 10 up to a symmetrical gig, which is 1,000 by 1,000. So those are key goals for the project: lower the cost, increase the capacity of speed. I referenced this point earlier. There are a handful of companies that control much of this market nationwide. This is publicly available data. We've got the wireless and the wired companies on here, but what we're really pointing out is that these companies are, in various cities and states around the country. They're not in Superior. And so when people are paying their bills, there are obviously, they're going to have staff locally in Superior. So not all of the money is leaving, but a significant amount of money is leaving the community today. And so from an economic development point of view, if most of the money ends up staying in Superior, there is a relevant economic development impact. All right, so what this is modeling is at different price points, what would the annual cost be and what would the 20-year cost be? And you can see that, we're ranging from just under 200 on the 20-year, just under 200 million up to 264 million, depending on what the price point is. And one thing we know that as companies move more towards monopoly status, that pricing tends to trend higher. And so that would be the concern, that is, if the city does nothing, and if a trend toward monopoly status continues, then what will the impact be on pricing? We obviously don't know that today, but that's a relevant concern for the community. All right. So the recommendations from the Superior CIT committee. So this wasn't Entry Point's recommendations. One was to pursue an open access model, which is to bring more competition into the area. And part of the work we did, we presented a dozen municipal models to the committee. We presented pros and cons of each of those models and examples of cities that have implemented it and what the cost structure is in those cities. So this recommendation to pursue an open access model is one of the recommendations that came out of committee. Second recommendation was to pursue an opt-in model or a voluntary participation model, as opposed to, in a true utility arrangement, people would be forced to participate. Every home would get connected. It would be a tax in some form. Some people would be happy about that, others would not. So the committee's recommendation was that at this stage of things, to pursue a voluntary model rather than a forced participation model. And then the last was to treat fiber optic infrastructure as a public utility. Not a utility in the sense that everybody's going to be forced to connect, but to start building policies around an acknowledgement that this is essential infrastructure and that it's in the interest of the city and the community to get this, essentially 50-year infrastructure available to the residents in Superior. So those are the key ideas we wanted to cover today. We're now going to open it up to questions. I'm going to give it back to Devin to sort of moderate that. And then we've got our website listed here, which is connectsuperior.com. And we want to hear from you.
Okay, thank you, Jeff. So as a side note, we want you guys to get involved. I mean, this is going to be kind of a community effort. If it's going to happen, it's got to have the support of the community. And that's, the mayor's been very clear about that. Councilor Elm has been very clear about that. And so please go to the website, learn more about the initiative. You're welcome to download a copy of the broadband plan. Also, there's a form on the main homepage that allows you to fill out and indicate that you're interested in getting involved to help promote this initiative. Okay. So with that, I'll read we've only had 3 questions submitted so far. So please feel free, anybody of you that are attending the webinar tonight, please feel free to add your questions to the Q&A section. If you click on the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen, it'll open up a box and you can add. So the first question is, Wisconsin is one of the states that has laws limiting municipal broadband. How can the project proceed under current law? Do you want to take that, Jeff?
Sure. There are 21 states that have barriers to cities or counties doing this. So let's just keep it at the city level since we're talking about Superior. Wisconsin does have barriers, but it's not an outright prohibition. And so from the beginning of the project, we've worked with the city attorney's office, and they've carefully gone through statute and reviewed what's required to do this. And, they're very aware of the barriers that exist and what's required to work through those barriers. So you are correct that it's not an explicit allowance to the city to move forward with this. There are certain steps the city has to take and certain hurdles that need to be climbed over. But the opinion that came back from the city attorney is that this can be done, and they're thoughtfully proceeding to make it possible to proceed.
Okay. Next question. I am wondering about getting this out of the town of Superior. We're about a half a mile from the city line. I know we have a fiber line in our front yard. So I don't know if you want to take that one on, Jeff.
Yeah. I think what's going to happen, at least initially, is that everybody within city limits. So if this goes forward, and that's not decided yet, but if this goes forward, I think everybody within city limits would be connected. I can tell you that in other projects we've done, a natural evolution is to move out typically into the unincorporated county. And that doesn't mean that the city network itself necessarily would. That comes in a variety of forms. It could be, so one of the cities we work with, there's an effort now to form a co-op using the same technologies, but a co-op is being formed. In this particular county, that county, like all counties in the US, have received COVID money. And in that particular county, the county is deploying some of that money into broadband. And so, one thing I'd recommend is that you be talking to your county leaders and make sure they're aware of what Superior's been working on, and get a conversation going at the county level.
Okay, next question. Does this infrastructure require a data center? If so, where will the physical building be located? Will the data center have capacity to sell space to private corporations, a lower cost provider, extra capacity? You want to take that one on?
Sure. So, it depends what you mean by a data center. It will require at least a server room. So it would be a small data center. There are a lot of switches that would be required for a city the size of Superior. So let's just say it will involve a small data center. The first project we did in Ammon, Idaho, they have actually just now stood up. So they've got their small data center that's in city offices. They have just deployed a building on the same property, but at an adjacent building, which is essentially a small data center for exactly what you're describing. So they've now commissioned this data center for the commercial entities within city limits to have the connectivity they need and for the functionality, which means redundancy, air conditioning, backup power, et cetera. So it's a very natural evolution of this kind of project. That's not specified at this point in the process, but it's a natural evolution for something like this.
Nor is the location specified yet.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. Does Spectrum still pay a fee to the city to offer their services here? I'm assuming they're talking about over the digital infrastructure. And if they do, what is that annual fee?
So Nick, I don't know if you're prepared to talk about the franchise fee. The answer is yes. There would still be revenues coming into the city from the franchise fee. I don't know if you have any comment on that, Nick.
Not at this time. I'm not sure what the current fee is that Spectrum pays on an annual basis.
Okay. Yeah, so it's a cable TV franchise fee. And there's an obvious movement nationwide that's known as cord cutting. So what that means is that people are getting their TV service over the top of the internet, as opposed to receiving it through a traditional cable relationship. It's coming across the internet, and that could be YouTube TV or Hulu or a variety of different things. So this fiber network is really focused on fast and low cost and reliable internet. A result could be that more and more people will consume their television service across this network over the top. That could happen. The project it's not built around the TV service. A fast speed, there will be no data caps on the proposed network. So there wouldn't be any constraints to people accessing an over-the-top solution, but the project itself is not targeting TV as the main driver of what's going on.
I think another important thing to note is that our recommendations to the city of Superior is that if this project does move forward and they do build out this infrastructure, that they keep the barriers to entry for ISPs to come on and offer services and other service providers, keep that barrier and cost very, very low so that it will actually encourage more service providers and more competition. That's also why, as part of the configuration, we're looking at having a connectivity from the core network in the city back to an internet exchange hotel data center, so that internet service providers that are already in that location can easily connect to the city's network and offer services on the network. So in that regard, if Spectrum were to be one of those decided to come on, there would be a very small fee, but it would be the same as any other ISP coming onto the network. Okay. How many households would it require or will be required to sign up to get this project started? So what kind of take rate is needed in order to just kind of justify the network moving forward? Jeff, do you want to take that one?
I'd say it becomes sustainable at 3,000 households. So you can stand up and it really is a question of maintenance and operations, at what point that becomes sustainable. So it's not requiring some kind of subsidy from the city. So I think 3,000 is a good number. Our goal would be to make the value proposition compelling enough to get something like a 50% take rate. So our target would be to get 50% of the homes and businesses in Superior,
Mhm.
simply because the value proposition's there, not for any other reason. But I think it becomes sustainable around 3,000.
Yep. And in the broadband plan, we've done the financial performance based upon around a 60% take rate. So anywhere in that 50 to 60 is what we're anticipating. But of course, it can be sustainable at a much lower level than that. Once approved, what is the time frame to build the broadband network in Superior? Why don't you take that one, Jeff?
Yeah, Nick, why don't you comment on that? What do you, I mean, you've got really a better view on sort of the thinking in the mayor's office.
Yeah, this project could move as quickly or as slowly as the community wants it to. If the appetite is there, which from our survey here and as well as our comp plan, I think that there is a huge appetite in the community for us to continue pursuing this. Once council takes official action and we adopt a budget and a plan for this program, we can begin moving pretty quickly to get this up and running for citizens. We're in a very early stage. It's hard to put an exact timeline or time frame on it, but we can move very quickly if the citizens and elected leaders are ready to do so.
Right.
Good.
Has the initial comp plan survey results shown support for broadband? Yeah, yes, they have very, very strong support for this type of project. We did review the survey results before. If you missed that part of the presentation, you're welcome to actually download a copy of the broadband plan, and the survey results are actually, printed in that plan as well. I live out on Badger Drive, and we can barely get 7 megabits download and 0.5 upload. Will this extend to my area? The answer is yes. If Badger Drive is in the city, that one I can't answer though. Nick, do you know where Badger Drive is?
I do. It's pretty far out. I do think Badger Drive would be covered probably in the later stages when we get out to that more fringe area of the city.
Okay. Would this connectivity be available for the school district? What kind of annual cost would be considered? Jeff, do you want to share kind of what's happened in some of the other, like in Ammon and some of the other cities, school districts?
Yeah, so a lot of the schools have access to E-rate, which is the federal program to make sure that schools and libraries are connected to fiber optics, and primarily fiber optics, not always, but generally it's fiber optics. And what we found when this model goes into a community, the pricing is significantly lower than the E-rate pricing. So yes, this network would embrace any anchor institution, library, school, hospital, clinic, whatever. The more participation, the better. And the more participation from anchor institutions, the better. But we've very successfully worked with school districts on other projects. And we think the price point will be compelling enough that we would hope the school district would come on.
Right. Excuse me. Are the ISPs who would be using the city-owned fiber local? Would the ISPs be local, or would they be spread across the country? If they're not local, how is that keeping the money spent on internet access in Superior? Okay, I can take this one. So we hope that we can get many ISPs that are local and regional ISPs to come on and offer services. However, because of the way that the technology is configured and that separation that Jeff talked about between the service providers and the infrastructure, they don't necessarily have to be local. Okay, you could have an ISP that comes in and offers services over the network that is not local. And that's the beautiful thing about this idea and this strategy and model, is because you as a consumer decides who you want to sign up with. If you want a local ISP, fantastic, you sign up for the local ISP. If somebody that's out of the local area, or somebody that is out of, even not has a presence in the state as far as their offices are concerned, and you sign up for them, then that portion of the $50, which we expect to be about $10, so about 20% of the $50 fee would then flow outside of Superior and outside of Wisconsin in that case. But ultimately, you as a consumer will decide whether or not you sign up for a local ISP or one that is not local. And in either case, about 20% of that $50 would go to the ISP portion of the cost. Okay. Any special equipment needed to hook up broadband for the consumer? Jeff, why don't you take this one?
Yeah, so the basic equipment, we would put huts out in the neighborhoods, and those huts would house switches. The switches would connect fiber that would run to individual homes. And inside each home we put, so a lot hasn't been decided, but the basic configuration is that there is a device in the home which terminates the fiber. And the city hasn't decided who its partner is going to be, either to build the network or to provide the functionality. But that's the basic configuration, is that you're going to have a device in the home which terminates the fiber. It will be a specified device, so it's not something anybody would go buy at Best Buy. It'll connect the fiber. Fiber would run back to an aggregation point, and then from that aggregation point back to that small data center.
And that's in any configuration, right? So if a third party came in and put fiber in the community, they would have the exact same device terminating the fiber at the presence at the home. So that's nothing unique to this kind of a network. Let's see here, whether the home opts in or not, won't their taxes have to pay for the infrastructure? Do you want to take that one on, Nick?
Yeah, sure. Sorry, just a second.
Hmm?
Here we go. No, with how the funding is set up for this, we would not have to raise taxes. Existing taxes that are paid go to a variety of services. I guess it could be argued that some of that money would be used towards something like this, but we would have it set up internally as a separate account. Funding would come from the people who are signing up and participating in the network.
Okay, wonderful. Let's see, if a person moves from one home to another, is there any connecting or disconnecting? Would all homes and apartments have access on Superior? You want to take that, Jeff?
Sure. So, the opt-in nature of this is that the city's not going to force people to do stuff. So if you move from a home that is connected to a home that's not, then you would need to get connected, because it's like water infrastructure or sewer infrastructure or any other utility. It's specific to a property. So if you move from a property that is connected to another property that is connected, it would be just a matter of activating the account, which can be done online. So it really depends on the scenario. The hope is that landlords will see the real value of this to their tenants, and that they'll make it possible for their tenants to access this kind of infrastructure. There hasn't been a policy decision today that would require landlords to do it. But again, we want to make the value proposition so compelling that there will be an interest and a motivation to connect to the network.
Yep. Okay. How much uptake do you need to have this venture work out financially? What percentage of people would need to opt in to the service and debt without subsidy? And if the uptake is insufficient, who would pick up the slack? Could taxpayers be on the hook? I think we've answered this, but you can, Jeff, why don't you go ahead and reiterate?
Yeah, so, something unique about this approach is that we will aggregate demand up front. So rather than building the network and then go find out who's interested, we are going to go find out who's interested And then if it's sustainable, build the network. So that's really what tonight is about, is to kick off that process of starting to accelerate the conversation in the city. And this, these kinds of events will continue. Something Devin referenced that we're hoping for is that people will, I think in time we'll have yard signs that are driving people to the website. We're going to look for people in the community who actively want to participate in terms of talking to their neighbors, or, perhaps hosting an event, or, the way Nick came on tonight to talk about it. We want people from the community to come to future events and say why they're interested in this. So to answer the question, if we're looking at a community-wide network, we would want at least 40% to participate. I referenced a $3,000 viability number. If you have some neighborhoods that wanted to do it and other neighborhoods that didn't, then it could be feasible to do a cross section of the city. That's not what we're looking for. We want a citywide project. And we want to make sure, a key goal is to solve the digital divide and not exacerbate it. So, 3,000 is one way to look at it, 3,000 premises. On a citywide basis, we want to get so that it's sustainable and doesn't rely on anything from the city, 40%.
Okay, we're going to have shorter answers here if we're going to get through all these questions. Okay, how will the fiber be run into the home? Conduit, direct bury, etc. I'll answer that. It'll probably be a combination depending upon where your home's located. So we're recommending wherever possible that the fiber is buried in conduit. In some locations of the city, it may have to be put on poles. And so that'll be somewhat variable depending upon where you live and where your neighborhood specifically. Does this create an employment opportunity for Superior? Why don't you take that one, Jeff?
Nick, why don't you?
Or Nick?
You're local. Yeah. Nick?
Yes, it absolutely does. There'd be obviously RFPs and things going out, but there'd be employment opportunity when it comes to construction, building, and as well as maintaining. So there would be full-time staff hired by the city of Superior that would help maintain and care for this network. So short and long-term employment opportunity with this project.
Will this project create a small internet exchange in Superior? It is possible that could be configured that way. At this point, our recommendation is that the city extends its network to an existing internet exchange data center. The closest one is in Duluth, right, just across the bridge. But it is definitely possible to configure a small exchange in Superior with this type of infrastructure. Those conversations haven't even happened yet, but great idea. What can this consumer experience with a high-speed broadband mean in real time? So what does high-speed 1,000 by 1,000 megabit mean? I'm assuming they're talking about in contrast to what they're experiencing today. Do you want to take that one, Jeff?
Yeah, it's faster than you need today, both up and down. So it's, whether you're a gamer or working from home or, whatever your application is, 1,000 by 1,000 is going to be faster than you need. The reason we focus on 1,000 by 1,000 is we can see in the not too distant future where that's going to be a necessity as we get to virtual reality for education and various other things. There's a number of applications that are bandwidth hogs that are coming. But today it's going to be faster than you need.
8K video, virtual reality gaming, all of those things are extraordinary bandwidth heavy and intense.
Yeah, and I should note that part of the miracle of fiber is that if you want to upgrade to 10 gig, so we're talking about 1 gig today, if you want to upgrade to 10 gig or 10,000 megabits per second, you don't have to change the fiber, you just change the electronics and the connectors. And then you can go to 10 gig or 40 gig or 100 gig. So that's part of the beauty of it, is that it's, the reason we can think about it as 50-year infrastructure is it's sort of infinitely scalable.
Excuse me. How will people in apartments access the network? You kind of alluded to this before, Jeff, but why don't you reiterate the apartment situation or the renter situation?
Yeah, I think, so as the city gets further along the path, they'll decide policy as it relates to apartments. Today, I think the plan today, we'll just say, is that each apartment would be treated as a separate dwelling unit and would have their own connection. Apartments represent an opportunity to lower costs. There could be shared infrastructure, there could be shared M&O. Those are policy decisions. Part of what the city will be looking at is how do they improve access for people that may not be able to afford it. And apartments are part of that equation. So, you know, I think those decisions will be made down the road, but there are good opportunities there.
We've already answered this one. How would their lines be run, below or above ground? Again, that's going to depend upon the specific geography of your neighborhood. Wherever possible, we're recommending it be a buried network, but there will be some parts of town that it's just not feasible to do that, and it'll be on above ground. Let's see here. Would subsidizing low-income households be considered? Nick, do you want to take that one?
Sure. I think it's too early in this project. I absolutely think it's something that could be considered, but I can't say to what extent at this point. We need a little bit more official action before that can be decided.
Good.
There are federal subsidies today. If you're not aware of those, you should be. But the part of COVID money is subsidies for broadband. That's not just unique to this project. It's across the board. But those won't last forever.
How much pushback do you anticipate from incumbent broadband service providers? Would there likely be legal challenges whether or not it's legitimate? And would incumbents likely try to undercut this service by temporarily reducing their own rates, creating an artificial market? Jeff, why don't you take that one on?
Yeah, I mean, obviously we can't speak for the incumbents. It's been done in other markets. You know, any company doesn't like a threat, particularly when they have a strong market position. So, you know, we don't know how the incumbents will respond, but we think fiber optics is inevitable infrastructure. It's going to happen, and the policy trajectory is toward pro-municipality, so giving municipalities the option to do this if they feel like it's in their interest. So we don't know. It will be difficult for them to compete with the price point. So they may lower their price. I think people are aware of that game. I think it's increasingly less compelling to people. They know that when it's been done temporarily, and they know why it's being done, and they know the price is going to go back up. So it's been a strategy that works, but it's not a strategy I would rely on if I was an incumbent.
What will the pricing be for businesses versus residential cost monthly? So we're anticipating the residential cost for 1,000 by 1,000 megabit, non-shared connection will be roughly in the $50 price range. That's what we're calculating, anticipating, that's projecting at this point. For businesses, we don't anticipate it'll be a lot more than that. It'll be probably slightly more, by maybe $20. So instead of 50, it'll be probably in the $65 to $75 range. Is that fair, Jeff? Yeah. How much would the end user pay to hook up? Why don't you take that one, Jeff?
So there's not a planned connection fee today. So this infrastructure would be treated like sewer and water. And so what we're really interested in is people making a commitment to the network. recognizing the power of fiber optics, recognizing this is long-term infrastructure. So what we're really interested in is for people to either pay off their infrastructure upfront, which typically is only about 5% of the total, or look at the $50 total monthly price and say, that's compelling, I'm going to make a commitment to the network. So that's really what we're looking for, is people to abandon this model of jumping around every year, recognize that fiber is way better than other media, and make a commitment to the network.
How long will it take for the city to recoup the cost of building the infrastructure? Why don't you address that one, Jeff?
So we try to do 20-year financing on most of our projects. Some of them are 15, some of them are 25. The reason we finance it over that period of time is that we want to get that monthly price to an attractive level. So, you know, we could pay it off over 5 years, but the monthly cost would be higher. So 20 years is a good number. And what we want people to recognize is they're potentially going to have a 20 to 30% drop in price and at least a 10x improvement in speed.
Would the city be bonding for the infrastructure and then recouping the cost through fees? Why don't you take that one on, Jeff?
Yeah, I mean, it's 50, you know, we're targeting $50 a month, and that's plus or minus 10% at this point.
And it's important to know that $20, roughly $20 or $21 of that $50 is the infrastructure expense. It is the capital cost of building the network out.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. So about 35% of the total is infrastructure. 35% is to maintain and operate the network, and the rest is the service provider. So you got those three buckets: infrastructure, maintain and operate, service provider.
Great. A couple of the next questions we've already answered, they're rhetorical, so I'll skip those. Where's the initial start capital coming from? The city ? The short answer is we don't know, but we do have some ideas and some really good strategies. Nick, if you want to expand on those, you're certainly welcome to.
Yeah, as Devin said, it hasn't been decided. That would be one of the next large steps in this project, would be talking about the funding and where capital expenses and things like that are coming from. Right now, with all of the federal bills coming out, there's some really great programs that we could apply for as a city that would help fund, and a lot of that would go to the startup capital. So there is that option. There's, of course, options for bonding and things like that as well. So nothing's been decided, but there's some very good programs out there that are looking very lucrative for this type of infrastructure endeavor.
Okay, next question. How can someone get involved in helping move this forward? Very simple. Go to connectsuperior.com, and at the bottom of the homepage, there's a button you can click and you can submit your information to be what we call a fiber champion. And this is very much going to be a grassroots effort. So as many of your friends and family members you get to get involved, please do. Why would anybody not want a much faster internet speed at a fair price? Jeff, do you want to take that one on?
Well, I mean, some may be in contracts that haven't expired. A lot of people just won't pay attention. So when Devin says we want people to be fiber champions, we don't want you to, sort of do backflips. We're looking for fiber champions to do small things, which may be pass out flyers to your neighbors, put on your social media post that you support the network, get people to show up and attend a meeting like this. So we want it to be grassroots. I think the main reason people wouldn't sign up is they're not paying attention. They're just, they're busy. They get home from work. They don't want to watch a webinar. That's all understandable. But I think that's the main reason, is they're just not aware of what's happening and not paying attention to it.
And to be honest with you, and to be fair, there is a group of people that have just a general disposition that anytime the city does anything, it's bad. And we should leave everything to the private sector. And look, I understand that mindset. But if you think back to the late 60s, early 70s, it was the same argument we were having back then. Should we move from septic tanks for each of our property to a centralized, wastewater sewer plant system? And there were a lot of people back then that didn't think it was a good idea to move from a septic system all the way to a centralized, sewer treatment system. But I don't think anybody would argue today that that was a bad idea back in the early 70s, right? And so essentially it's the same debate today with this, right? Okay. Well, building, hang on, I just want to make sure I get them. If a building manager pays for one connection, then deploys Wi-Fi for all tenants to use, would one connection still cost $50, or would the city charge per apartment, or what would the apartment have to, let's see here, or would each apartment have to own a gig physical access at $50 each? Do you want to address that one, Jeff?
Yeah, there will likely be policy around multifamily dwelling units. There will likely be policies prohibiting landlords from making money on this. So we would likely stop a landlord from becoming a mini internet service provider incumbent. But if the goal is to save tenants money, that could be a possibility. So if the goal is to sort of exploit this, that probably won't be possible. But if the goal is to save people money, then that will be looked at and vetted.
Now, keep in mind, Jeff's opinion on this and my opinion on this don't really matter, because it'll be the city that makes the policy, not us. But if a landlord does want to offer incredibly good and improved connectivity, we think there should be a path for them to help those tenants do it. One thing we've not talked about in all of this, and the question hasn't been brought up, so I'm going to bring it up, and that is, what happens to appraised property value when fiber systems and fiber connectivity is installed in a community like this? Okay, and there are many studies that have been done by various universities across the country that suggest between 3 and 7% immediate uptick in private property and apartment buildings appraisal. So there's a huge advantage for landlords to get fiber installed, especially fiber that is designed to be installed at cost, without a lot of overhead and without a lot of profit involved, right? And so there is incentives for landlords and for homeowners alike. They go far beyond just improving service and a lower monthly fee for that service. Okay. Will building costs increase over time? I'm assuming they're talking about building the network. Will it increase over time? Why don't you take that one on, Jeff?
Yeah, that's actually a concern of ours, because there's so much federal money coming out that, it's a supply and demand thing. So COVID caused shortages in a lot of electronics equipment, and fiber is in short supply. So we're looking at 5-6 month timelines to procure fiber. So as more federal money flows into building fiber networks, that is a concern that, we talked to a construction company yesterday that said they're booked out 7 years. We haven't run into that as a problem with all the projects we're working on around the country, meaning our timelines are manageable. But it's a concern that both, the supply chain's disrupted because of COVID, and there's going to be a lot. We think the whole country is going to get fiber in the next 15 years. So we think there's going to be pressure on all the systems that are, whether construction or engineering or materials.
Okay. How would these fiber speeds affect home mesh networks? Would it extend wireless distances around the home and property like the garage? You want to take that one on?
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting question. Really what would happen, it depends on the layout of the home. The fiber in itself won't necessarily, I mean, it's going to be faster. So I think you're going to see a net positive impact, but you may need to look at putting wireless access points in a particular configuration of the home. They're not super expensive. So if you've got an area that you work in a lot and right now you're getting a poor, when the system's installed, if you're getting a poor signal to that area, you can put an access point there. And what that essentially does is, they're called, there's different names for them, but whole home Wi-Fi solutions. So there are good solutions in the market that can solve that problem. And certainly the overall effect of fiber is going to be very positive.
Yeah, I mean, one thing you'll experience, you may not extend your Wi-Fi coverage necessarily, but the congestion on that Wi-Fi network, that Wi-Fi will actually hum at its maximum capacity because it'll never have a bottleneck behind the Wi-Fi signal that is, creating a challenge from a congestion perspective. So yeah, you should experience dramatically improved, Wi-Fi, wireless mesh network, functionality with this type of technology. Let's see here. Would the business cost include a static IP address? The answer is yes. That would come from the internet service provider you decided to subscribe to. And we anticipate there will be internet service providers that offer static IP addresses to businesses. It just makes sense. And that's kind of where that a little bit, that $20 difference comes into play in some of those aspects. But there will also be ISPs that don't offer those. And so businesses will need to be very specific in who they choose and the type of service they select. But that'll definitely be driven off of, the service providers on the network, and that'll be available for sure. Okay. Would business and other entities be able to have redundant fiber installs to have multiple ISPs for internet redundancy? Jeff, why don't you take this one on?
So the city has not selected their open access partner at this point. So one way to solve the problem you're raising the question about is to have multiple fibers coming in. Another way to solve the problem is using network virtualization. So Entry Point is both a consulting firm and there's a software side of the house. So when we work with cities, we virtualize the network and our customers solve that problem with software. So they don't need to run two fibers. You can have multiple ISPs operating on the network at the same time today. So
yeah, so just to clarify, in the cities that have currently deployed these technologies and the model we're describing here, okay, there are many homeowners and businesses alike that have two ISPs subscribed to simultaneously. In fact, in the home, what they'll do is they'll have an ISP for their kids' Netflix and gaming activity, and then they'll have a separate ISP connection for their home-based business or their work from home business efforts. And under a virtualized model, you have one single strand of fiber coming in, you have one piece of electronics terminating that fiber, and then through virtualization, you can slice that fiber connection into multiple private networks that then are isolated for each of those ISP services. And that is a very common thing, because if you think about it, the expense in a system like this is, number one, installing the fiber with the electronics, okay? And then the maintenance and operation of that fiber. Well, if you install two fibers, that means you have two physical fibers, that's doubling the cost. You have double the electronics, and then you have double the maintenance on that system. Whereas in a virtualized system, you pay for the installation once, you pay for the maintenance of the network once, and then the ISP fee, like we said, is about 20% of that $50. So they just tack on another $10 ISP. And instead of a $50 ISP, they have a $60 ISP because they have two ISPs. If that helps clarify that issue.
Yeah, so the word virtual, I just think of software. So rather than solving this problem physically with another fiber, we're solving it with virtualization, which means we're solving it with software. So we're using software to separate the two ISPs and deliver them both simultaneously.
Okay. What is the disaster recovery plan to get us back up and running if a fiber is cut? So if somebody's out in the front yard with a backhoe and they dig up their fiber connection, what is the disaster recovery plan or the fix for that? You want to share that with Jeff?
Yeah, so it depends where the cut is. We won't have redundancy from the curb to the house. So we're not going to do separate paths into a house. That would just be too expensive. So in that case, we would have to, the city crew would come out and splice it, reconnect it, and repair it. There will be redundancy built into the network. It's likely that it'll be some kind of ring. And so there will be an architecture which main trunk lines have some resiliency built into them just by virtue of the way the network's designed. So it really depends on where that fiber cut happens. The worst one we've seen in the last 10 years for cities we worked with was about a 5-hour outage. And that was a backhoe hit a main trunk line. And it took them that long to splice it back together. And the backhoe didn't call dig line, wasn't following procedure. So, it was clearly the backhoe's fault, but, you got to go out and fix that.
Even with the federal subsidy, low-income individuals, how does paying for the hookup close the digital divide? It seems like a barrier for those less fortunate. Want to address that, Jeff?
Yeah, it's an important area. If we're going to treat the infrastructure as essential, there's no debate today on whether we're going to get clean water to everybody or whether we're going to get sewer systems to everybody or heating for their homes. So, as we change policy and start to treat this as essential infrastructure, then there will be an expectation that people can afford it and we can get it to everybody. There's a lot you can do from a policy perspective. A lot of people that can't afford it may live in a multifamily. So I'll give you one example. It's not exhaustive, but the city could set policy that the multifamily, let's say it's a fourplex, 4 families in that multi-dwelling unit, those 4 families could share the fiber connection, the infrastructure. Those 4 families could share the maintenance and operation, and that would take what would otherwise be like a $20 cost for infrastructure and a $20 cost for M&O down to $5 per family. So we're not telling you that's what Superior will do, but there are things that can be done from a policy perspective, and that's further down the road as this moves forward.
Okay. U.S. Census data shows roughly 65% of the Superior homes are connected. Isn't a 50 to 60% take rate unrealistic? Why do you take that, Jeff?
Yeah, I mean, it's all about value proposition, right? So when incumbents compete against each other, cable companies are clearly winning because they have faster infrastructure. But if we come in and we drop the price 20 to 30% and increase the speed 10x, then we don't think it's unrealistic to think that we're going to get an unusual take rate. This is largely an economic decision, but it's also a speed and reliability decision. So it's really about value. Can we get the value to the consumer or the customer to, create that kind of demand?
Right. I mean, the issue is today, 65% of the households are connected to one of the incumbent networks, in most cases to Spectrum, the cable operator. And the question is, can the city bring so much value at such an affordable rate that many of those people decide that they want to change? Okay, so this is not targeting those that don't have connectivity today. It's targeting everybody in the city. Okay. I would like to thank Jeff and Devin for the presentation tonight, and thank Councilor Elm for pushing this and the mayor for supporting this. It is my belief that this is needed, in all caps, for the city. This is something that pushes Superior forward in areas of technology, business, personal life, just to name a few. I fully support moving forward with this and hope we as a community can come together to see this through. Councilor, I think is it Ledin? Is that how you pronounce his last name?
Ledin.
Ledin. Thank you, Councilor. Appreciate your support. How can we encourage city council members to support this? Well, I know that all of them have email addresses, all of them have phone numbers, and most of them have Facebook posts or Facebook accounts and other accounts. So absolutely, ping them, let them know. That, I think that ends all of the questions, certainly all the questions in the Q&A. Oh, no, hang on, a few came in. A few years ago, we were competing for the gig program by Google. Is this in any way connected to the Google proposal or similar to it? Just a couple more quick questions. This is not connected to the Google program, okay? The technology configuration is faster, and the automation is, and the open access nature of it is different from the Google network. The Google networks that are there's a few of them throughout the country. They are essentially a closed network. Only Google services run on them. So there's a fundamental difference between what you were trying to accomplish a few years ago and this initiative that we're talking about tonight. Let's see here. For cities that have broadband service like this, what kind of things are customers saying about the service? What are the typical responses to such a thing? Jeff, I'll let you take that one, and that's our last one.
Yeah, so there's a bunch of information out there on these networks, and Councilor Elm has access to all of that information. We'll put more and more out on the website, which gives you this kind of stuff, but it's not unreasonable to see 60 to 70% take rates for these networks that are like this. So people are voting with their wallets, but in addition, there's a bunch of content. There's magazine articles about these open access networks. There's university research that's been done on them. So there's a bunch of content, and we'll make that available via the website.
Excuse me. Yes, and a recording of this session tonight will also be posted in the related information section on the website. So feel free to go back and rewatch it. Invite your friends to go watch it. And then also, we also have another webinar coming up, kind of another version of what we experienced tonight. That one is scheduled for, I'm just looking it up here. I should have had this at the ready. But the next webinar is going to be May 3rd at the same time, 7 p.m. So again, we know the mayor will post that information. The city will send it out. Various councilors will send that information out. But please encourage your friends, your neighbors to attend one of these webinars so that we can get their questions answered, and we can start building kind of a grassroots effort of support if this is something you think would be important and you would benefit from. So thank you, everybody, for attending. Thank you for letting us hold you over and answer all the questions. I hope it was valuable to you. More information is coming, and again, all of this information can be accessed on the connectsuperior.com website. All right, with that, we'll say goodnight. Thank you for your time.
Thanks, everyone.